Welcome to another installment of the Geekscape Book Club. As always, I'm Christian Bladt. Our panel will be along shortly. This month, we are covering Marvel graphic novel number 5, God Loves, Man Kills, I believe from 1982. And for the first time on Geekscape Book Club, we're joined by one of the creators of the work that we're discussing. Chris Claremont, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us here on the book club.
It's my pleasure. Glad to be back.
So I think it's interesting to talk about in the context of this coming out. I mean, I mentioned it's Marvel graphic novel number 5. So the graphic novel as a format was relatively new. I know the first Marvel graphic novel was The Death of Captain Marvel, which for many years I didn't read because of how expensive it was. And then finally I got a chance to read it. And then you realize like, oh, it's a special story. You know, it's a beautiful story. But I got my hands on this a long time ago. What's that? Oh,
forgive me for laughing. Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. But this book,
I was just thinking of a cover price of $4.95 as being horrifically expensive.
Oh no, I no. By the time that I was reading comics, it was already, a back issue, so it was priced higher. That was one of the things I was noticing looking at the cover of God Loves, Man Kills. It was $5.95, I think, and it was like considered expensive. Now any comic you get is like $4.99. So it's definitely, because comics at that time were, I don't know, 40 cents, 45, somewhere in that range. But talk about kind of the idea of approaching. We're going to do a special X-Men story, a standalone X-Men story that, doing something that was different than, just a standalone issue of the regular book.
Well, I think what Louise Simonson, the editor, and I wanted to do was something that we would not or could not consider doing in the regular run of the book. I wanted to tell a story that if a reader had only one opportunity to buy one book relating to the X-Men, what would it be? And for me, this was it. And I wanted to deal with the series addressing its core conflict head on, which, like it or not, is racism. And again, we're talking the end of the 70s, the very beginning of the 80s. And it was a time when that, for me anyway, growing out of the 60s, my late adolescence was my early adolescence was defined by a presidential assassination. My late adolescence was defined by Martin King's murder and Robert Kennedy's murder. And there was no way I could ever escape it. But I think for me, this was an opportunity, a unique opportunity, I felt, given the series, the X-Men, and given the fundamental, the foundation core of its premise. This is a book that had a unique take on this situation that you would not be able to find in the Avengers or the Fantastic Four, possibly even Spider-Man. And this was me wanting to hit for the wall. And from the fact that close to 40 years later, it's still an impactful, sadly impactful story, I like to think I did. This was a home run shot. And the heartbreak, I guess, for me is that looking at the world on the better part of a half century later, it's still almost a necessary story and a way of reminding people of what this fictional world has in common with the real world that we inhabit.
Yeah, no, I think that obviously the themes are unfortunately just as relevant, if not more so, and in no way does it feel outdated, you know? And it's you know, if we'd been able to read it
Sadly,
40 years later and think, oh, what a quaint notion that you know, a race of people were being singled out because of their abilities. You know, we've come
I'm
so
not
far from
sure.
then.
I'm not
Go
sure.
ahead.
It quaint, I would say, is not the word because the spinning. Can you hear
Yeah, we
me?
lost you a little bit there. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
And yeah, I lost you a little bit
Yeah,
there. Well,
I lost you. That's why.
yeah.
The thing, it's not a quaint situation when, as we're discovering, an increasing percentage of readers think William Stryker is right.
Yeah. It's a
That,
it's a
I mean, suddenly when you find the situation being defined in terms that mutants are a threat that must be dealt with rather than they are a branch of humanity to be judged as, as a
hmm.
you hear me? The
Yeah.
wheel
No, I
started
think
spinning.
yeah, well, yeah, and I think if it happens again, maybe we'll try clicking off the camera. Sometimes that makes it better. But for right now, let's. This is a good time
I
to
find it.
bring in the first of our co-hosts. Jeff Williams Jr. is joining us, and I
How
think
you guys doing?
Connor will be along shortly.
Oh,
Jeff,
joys
say
of
hello to Chris
technology.
Claremont.
How you doing, Chris? Nice to meet you. Nice to talk to you.
Likewise in return.
How's everything
I
going? I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us and yeah, and just learning more about the X-Men series and stuff, because I have questions after reading your just some of your comics, but I'm sure Christian's already gotten into that.
No, we only just kind of started. We're dealing with a little bit of the background and you know how the story is unfortunately still relevant 40 years later. And so Jeff,
Sorry.
I was telling Chris before we
The
started, you read this
Hopefully
for the
you can
first
hear me.
time. Yes, I can hear you. Are you hearing me?
Yeah, the wheels were spinning and everything blacked out for about a minute. That's why
Okay.
I didn't say anything.
Okay.
Anyway, here
Um,
we go again.
but so Jeff, you were reading this for the first time. So just sort of overall thoughts as you read this story, you know, from 40 years ago, reading it in 2023.
Yeah, so I it took me on an emotional roller coaster, I feel like, because as you can see, I wore this on purpose. Storm's one of my favorite characters. So seeing that she supposedly passed away in one of the first chapters, I was like, why, what are you doing? What's going on? So to go on that emotional roller coaster of a story, to
Sure.
be just so enticed by why people are doing it, what brought them to the realization, what backstory, like Christian mentioned, is some stuff that happened years ago, 40 years ago, but it's still mindsets and things and ideas that are happening today. So it's wild to see. But it was a great story and like it put me on a full roller coaster.
Yeah, and I think that you know, to what you were saying earlier, Chris, obviously, you know, I think that the bullet points of the story could have happened in a regular book, but it's definitely presented in something of a more mature way. The fact that you know, tragically, children are murdered like on the second page, and just like how hard that hit me the first time I read it. I was probably, I don't know, like 10 or 11 when I read this, and I was like, oh wow, this is that kind of story. So I think that what there isn't, and something that maybe was unfortunately leaned on too much by comics that were looking for mature themes in the decades later, was we're going to put as much violence and sex and swearing in there. What was the balance for, well, we want to use this canvas that we have ahead of us that's different than the monthly book? Was it a conscious, okay, here's things that we can do? Or was it just a general, we're going to tell the story in a slightly different way, but in the end, it didn't come out of your head the same way as if it was a normal book?
Well, it's why
Uh-oh. Well, now we lost him entirely.
Yeah.
This is why it's good that we're recording this instead of
Exactly.
doing it live. But now Eric's here, but it's good. I was just saying that it's a good thing that we're doing it this way instead of streaming it live, because we've had some connectivity issues, unfortunately, with Chris, and hopefully he'll be able to click back in. And, this maybe we'll be only posting the audio of this one, but he's back.
Oh,
So
all right.
sorry.
There you are. So Chris, not only are you back, now we have our full complement of hosts here. To just sort of and Eric, say hello to Chris Claremont.
Hello there, Mr. Claremont. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us on your Saturday.
Oh, my pleasure. It's just saving me from doing chores.
Yeah, I was
My
telling
wife will
Chris
get
before
even
we
as
started.
soon as I'm done.
This is keeping me from packing up some boxes to move to the new house. But and we'll just reset because there was a connectivity issue. The idea of telling the story in a graphic novel versus the monthly book, did you approach it significantly different when you mapped it out, or was it largely the same, Chris?
Oh, it was, I guess the easiest way to define it is, it's if I had an X-Men movie to make, this would be it. Which is, in a way, I was not thrilled when Brian, director of the first movie, threw in elements. I mean, turning the villain into Stryker, having his son be the MacGuffin, that warped everybody. It's like, by taking the little bits and pieces, sorry, in X2, not X1.
Right.
To my mind, as the original author, I felt he trivialized it, but far worse, eliminated the opportunity to pitch the story as a seminal story of its own right, in its own right. But that was, that's the world of Hollywood. Theoretically glamour, but in reality, everybody gets screwed. This just depends on your pay grade from the bottom to the top of the heap. No, I mean, but the idea was, I suppose an analogy would be in Schindler's List, when Schindler is introduced to a cleansing and everything of a Jewish community within a greater city, and it's all black and white except for this one little girl who's running through the nightmare, and you look at her and she's a perfectly ordinary, lovely little girl, but you have no illusion as what's in store for her. And in a way, that's the opening scene. It's two kids who don't understand what's happening. They're just running. And it's, as the little girl says, why are you doing this? And the woman who, because you exist, and shoots her. And then Magneto comes along and they're strung up. And every decision that we made that I made in that opening scene, why kids, why they're kids of color, why it's the person who is shooting them is white, why Magneto finds them strung up, and that's his primal response to it. It was me trying to tell the audience, this is not your normal story. We are not starting from just down the block in Salem Center, and we'll do our 22 pages and then we'll move on to the next adventure. This is a self-contained story. And it's why later on, when Kitty and a fellow student in her dance class get into a fight, and Stevie Hunter, the teacher, says, you got to control yourself, kid. Don't, just because he uses words, you don't have to get so upset. And Kitty, being 13, does exactly what a 13-year-old alpha would say. Oh yeah? How would you feel if he used the N-word? Except we use the N-word because apparently the 70s was a slightly more enlightened publishing era.
Just to interject on that, Chris, for a second, when they did the extended cut a few years ago, my first thought was, I wonder if they're going to still have Kitty use the N-word, because that would change the impact of what she said. You know, the fact that, you know, Peter apologizes to Stevie and she didn't mean it. And then I'm actually getting chills as I explain
Stevie
it.
has her moment of, yes,
thinking,
she did.
no, she meant it. And she's
And
right. And then, yeah. So I don't know. I was glad to see that they didn't feel like in this.
Well, they kept the end, but they used a lot of asterisks, which I understand from a publishing standpoint. The world has changed fundamentally, and Disney is not Marvel.
Right. That's a good point.
The point for me is there are words that have specific meanings to the people that they are used against. And it applies to every subgroup on the planet. We all have, sadly, words that make us want to lash back. And sadly, the United States, being a nation of immigrants, being a coalition, like it or not, of every subgroup in the world, we have a whole bunch of them. And sadly, some get used more and more cruelly than others. This is one of them. But it's also, especially at the time, especially given the times that led into the moment that I wrote the book, it was the most recognizable to make a specific point. No one would get it if I said Juden or even Kike, forgive me, because the audience here is more visibly defined by what they see on TV, in the news, and in entertainment. And some words in those days showed up more often than others. And I needed that. As the writer, I felt that moment, that confrontation needed the, for want of a better phrase, gut punch that would make the audience go, what? This is not something you would see, not a confrontation you would have in a regular comic. And the way I was trying to define every moment from that to the ending was, if there came a moment to turn right and be more tactful, or turn left and go for the gut, we were going to turn left. And, you know, the whole idea was to get everyone to the last page where Magneto says, the last scene, your way isn't going to work. And he holds out his hand and Charles reaches out to it because Charles understands or believes now. And it's Scott's moment to shine and step in and say, no, you can't, we won't let you do this. We are your students. We are who we are because of the example you set, not the example that Eric sets. You may both be right. You may both be wrong, but this is our world now and our choice. And you have to be here to be our conscience, if nothing else. A lot's changed since then, but that was my thought. And the thing, it's setting up, again, that's why looking at it from the moment we created it, you have Stryker pointing at Kurt and saying, you call that human? And Kitty saying, yes. And that was for me as the shaper of Nightcrawler, that was the essence of his character. Everything about him makes you believe he would be exactly what he looks like, a demon. What possible reason could there be to create him in that shape and not have him turn out to be a monster? Well, oddly enough, he has a conscience. And his decision was, I'm this way because God made me this way. If God did this, who am I to argue with higher authority? More importantly, who am I to spit in his face? If I'm here looking like this, then I've got to prove there's a reason for it, and a positive reason for it, and take things as they go from there. He is, in many respects, was always meant to be the soul of the team. Wolverine's the punch. Kurt's the aspect that gives that punch a moral validity. And why he and Logan are best friends, because each of them is the antithesis of what the other is. Logan looks great, but he's a monster. Kurt looks like a monster, but he's this, for want of a better term, the young saint. And that's why Kitty stands with him and not with Stryker, because just because you and I look alike doesn't mean we're anything like one another. He's the real son of the Almighty, not you. And that's why in the last moment, because given that I grew up in the 60s, this is my way of saying there has to be a better way. In reality, the person who's responsible for resolving the problem, well, ending the confrontation, is a normal person and a police officer. Because it's not that authority rules, it's that we as a community trust people to keep us safe. And this person is among that groupage, whether it's teachers or nurses or doctors or whatever. And to end this, he ends Stryker's threat, not killing him, wounding him, but he's a very good shot. Even Madison Square Garden, if you're gonna be on national television, you might as well do it right. But
the Knicks never figured that out, though.
Well, not in my lifetime.
Dude, I'm from across the river. We have our own team.
That's right. We do have a team now.
And they won, sorta, kinda, maybe. At least we're not in New Jersey.
Just for our audio listeners, we are now joined by Eric Connor, and I do want to give him an opportunity, as Jeff did. Eric, you also read God Loves Man Kills for the first time just ahead of this conversation, and you've read a substantial amount of comics before, but reading this for the first time, what were your thoughts reading this in 2023, thinking about how it's now more than 40 years old?
Well, that's the amazing thing, and
sorry,
I know,
Chris. sorry to age
you.
work.
If it makes you feel better, though, Chris, I mean, to my right, I have a lot of the comics that you might recognize that were still in my box in the other room. So it's interesting that I hadn't read this.
I didn't know we're doing show and tell. I was rereading this recently.
Take your pick.
Chris,
I got them all,
I wasn't prepared.
I know, Jeff, you didn't bring anyway, but
Give me a minute.
to your point of reading this for the first time.
And but you notice that his are in like plastic with bags and boards, and I mean,
if we're really paying attention, look who this is signed by, Chris.
What I'm more impressed by is the shield.
Hey, I appreciate
I do love that shield.
I assume it's on loan from
I made it.
He raided Kevin Feige's office. Don't let him know.
Actually, I was never mind. Oh, duh. Got the cup right here. Letter person.
Well, so first of all, I'm amazed I didn't read this, considering I was definitely reading at that time, and I wonder if it was because it was a graphic novel, so convincing my folks, to give me
now,
like
Chris,
$1.
now we get back to the $5.95 price tag.
Yeah. I mean, like 75 cents for a comic, no problem.
Yeah.
But in reading this now, and I really, what you were bringing up, even about like the use of language. So my son just had for the video audience, my son had a cameo just now, and my wife and I took him to a production of Diary of Anne Frank recently that was performed by a Latinx cast, and that is one of the books out there that is getting censored right now, banned from schools, and so when you bring up these things about what can and cannot be said, and really the themes of the writing here. And sometimes I had to really double check. I'm like, wait, this thing was actually written in the early 80s, because you had moments in there, and I shared a couple of them with Christian where, it's as if we're looking at the news from the past 2 years, really some very specific things related to even what happened at the Capitol building. And there it is.
Yeah,
in
for
your
our video
panels.
audience, this was one of the things that you sent me, was sort of the news report from the end of the episode, for the end of the issue, right, Eric?
Yeah, right, exactly. Where Stryker was arraigned today, and he denounces the indictment as religious persecution, predicted the eventual vindication of himself in his crusade. Well, you just have to change a word or two, and it might as well be any number of news broadcasts from the past couple of years. And I think that, in reading this, that's the stuff that really grabbed me, beyond the fact that, to me, this is the X-Men. Seeing Colossus and Kitty Pryde, like, that is what made me fall in love with comic books, was like this time, that team. So seeing these characters that really were the characters of my kind of youth, my formative years as a comic book reader, was really special for me personally. But then as a parent, as someone who I would like to think cares about what happens in this country, I found like the themes of this so rich, and even in the reading of your interviews, when you talked about, and I was wondering if you could comment on this, how you had spent like 6 months kind of traveling, and during the 80s, right, there was this time of the mega church, the Bakers, the Swaggarts, all these people that were all over TV preaching religion, or maybe I should say selling religion. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that in terms of how that helped you formulate the ideas for the story.
And just to interject before Chris responds, I mean, this is before the Jimmy Swaggarts and the Falwells, and the late 80s saw a lot of the televangelists crumbling down around them, and this is a precursor to that. But clearly,
when they were at their height, right, like before.
Yeah, but clearly in 1982, it was all very relevant. Yeah.
Well, but I was looking for my copy of the Bible. I still have it, that with notes and scribbles and paste-its all over the place. It's an interesting book. But yeah, there's nothing like spending Sunday watching. I mean, now it's all morning news, Sunday morning news, even on television. But then you could, there's one church I remember where the minister is up on top of the tower, and there's this sort of aqueduct line of connecting one with the other, flowing water, and there would be a line of parishioners coming out in their robes, and he would dunk them. This, you are saved, you are saved, you are saved. And it's an assembly line. And I was thinking, that's interesting. You know, listening to the preach, the sermons, and realizing that it's all about getting 10, 15,000 people a session into the church, 5 sessions a day on Sunday, and then getting in my Gulfstream and flying to wherever. And I mean, it's not even then. It's a couple of years ago, one minister was saying he needed an emergency fundraising campaign because he needed $95 million to buy a new Gulfstream 4.
Yes, because his private jet was old, and he needed the new private jet to do the work of God. I remember that hearing those sound clips. Yes.
I don't know. Again, the disadvantage of reading the Bible is they used to do this on their, you know. Last I heard, the New Testament wasn't preached with a sound system, and that moment from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where they say, "What's that? You want to eat the Terminators?" You know, because he's 300 meters up the hill, and they're at the bottom of the hill, and the voice doesn't carry quite so far. But it's what it's all about, or what I was perceiving it as being about, was not the word or the beliefs that go behind those words. It's about the presentation. It's about the showmanship. It's about how much can I get each weekend, each Sunday, and it's $2 to pay the rent, and it's maybe $2 for good deeds, and then there's $6 for me. You know, out of every 10, and it's. I mean, my wife is a person of faith, and every Sunday we go to church and I listen to the sermons out of curiosity as much as anything else. And we have a very good pastor, and one listens to what he says, it's powerful and meaningful and impactful. And the point of the story is that Stryker does not see himself as an evil man. He is a person of service. He was a master sergeant in the Army until the accident that killed his wife and maimed his son. And then he went on a drunken spree, and he lost everything, and in the process found his salvation. And committing himself to the word of God as passionately and as focusedly as he committed himself to the defense of his country, he's become the man he is now, but he still defines things in the same dynamic. I defended my country. I will defend my faith, my world, against this enemy. Not the Soviets, but mutants. Why? Because they are inhuman. Why are they inhuman? Because he looked at his son, who his son is now, and said, I can't be evil. I was doing everything I was supposed to do. I lost my wife, and my son is this monster. How did this happen? Mutants. He's a mutant. Mutants are the devil's way of getting even. And it was trying to build a logic chain that would, if you just shifted position slightly, you could see what he's talking about. And that's what I was saying before about how disturbing it is that more and more people are crossing the Rubicon to Stryker's side of the equation because it makes sense to them. But I wanted to make it as evil, not evil, ooh, there's a Freudian slip, as equal and relevant a conflict, confrontation, choice as I could. I didn't want an A or B dynamic here. I wanted a question all the way through it so that his decisions, Stryker's decisions in the beginning, you can read it and be creeped out, but think, okay, he's got a point. And Charlie's doubt at the end comes from the same foundation. He thought he was right, but from his perspective, if I can be so easily coerced, it wasn't easy, but to Charlie, that anybody who could shift him from his life focus, it has to be his fault. And it's, from Magneto's point of view, that happened to him. Well, then it was only 80 years ago in Auschwitz. And when his daughter died, and when his wife ran away from him in horror because he was a monster. And, I think the thing in Magneto's and Eric's, the core of him is, if he had saved their daughter, would his wife still have run away? And part of him is saying, yes, she would have run away from us both because we are monsters in her eye. And for all he knows, his daughter would have run away thinking the same thing. These are comic book characters in the regular run of the books tend to be more binary. You're good or you're evil. End of story. The Dr. Doom, you put Doom and Reed next to each other, it's a fairly easy split. But me, with the X-Men, but especially with this story, I like blurring the borders. The Rubicon is not a single passionate river. It ebbs, it flows, it shifts like the Mississippi. It wanders all over the place. But so do people. And the fun, weird word, for me is not simply dancing them back and forth across that Rubicon and finding the moments where they think, woulda, shoulda, coulda, maybe, as Magneto always says, if I just take a little step over the line, I won't corrupt the New Mutants, but I can save the day. And the mutants are holding on to it because the minute he crosses the line moves. And each little step takes you to disaster. It's not a big moment. It's lots of little moments. And the thing about today versus the 60s and the 70s is we're used to seeing big moments. Why? Because in those days, things were defined by assassinations and, crossing the Medgar Evers and being pulverized by police. It was right up there in your face. I mean, the story I tell, it's nowhere near on that level, but it was a defining moment for me. Is showing up for the first day of school dressed as I would be dressed back in England, in shorts and knee socks and a tie and a vest and a jacket, looking very proper, and coming home with a bloody nose and a black eye. And I never dressed that way again in school because I was marked as an outsider. As an outsider, I was a target. As a target, it was a whole lot of people against one, and I never wanted to be that one again. And I guess this story is the series, but the story is about all these kids want to be is part of the whole. They want to live happily. They want to have friends up and down the block who like them for who they are and who they like for who they are, and have no problem with the fact that they're mutants. And, you know, when you're a kid, is that such a bad thing to want that ideal? And the problem is it keeps getting harder and harder and harder. And for some reason, grown-ups keep screwing it up. Except, you know, the grown-ups used to be kids as well.
That's why I think the imagery from the scene that we've talked about already, you know, after the purifiers assassinate those two kids, having them strung up with Muty hanging there. I mean, it was very powerful. It really resonated. And Jeff, were you surprised by the tone of this book compared? Because for people who don't know, Jeff hasn't read a ton of comic books.
Yeah.
But this seems like it's probably a little bit more, I don't want to use mature in the wrong way, but it's a little bit more advanced than some of the stuff that you've read, at least for this show before, right? So were you surprised by some of the imagery and how hard it hit because of how brutally honest it was?
Yeah, 100%. I kind of touched on it at the beginning by saying it was like a roller coaster because it was putting me through a lot of emotions. I like talked about just Storm, but like just through the whole experience. Like you said, we started with the two kids and they're just getting murdered for seemingly no reason. And it's a visually shocking moment. And then you start to unravel what their passion is. They're kids of color. They're being hung of sorts. So it's visually shocking. And then you got to kind of put into perspective, like this was created 40 years ago. I'm reading it 40 years now, and this is my experience, and I'm still seeing similarities. How is, like, my first immediate question was like, how was this perceived back when it was first like released? Because even seeing like the version that I read, it just said in, and then it was like a border, like it was like what's the word, like blacklisted or
Blacked
something.
Out. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, blacked out.
Okay.
So and I was like, oh, that's a cool way of like saying, not cool, but I mean that makes sense of like getting the word across, but not showing it. And full transparency, like I'm a person that's never said that word because I don't like it. I don't want to promote it. So to see it like that, I was like, okay, I understand it. It gets the point across, and we move past it. But like it's still impactful because, and then when I stopped reading, I'm like, so how would she feel about it if like a kid said that to her, but like she knows, like I don't know, because like I've had
you're talking about Kitty's teacher, Stevie Hunter. How would Stevie feel if Kitty was right and someone had said it? Yeah. Because and to Chris's point, you know, another slur in that moment doesn't have the impact.
Yep.
Everyone who reads that goes like, oh, that's what being called Muty means to them. And it hadn't been, at least not at that point, it hadn't been dealt with in those terms, you know?
Yeah.
And it would have been the same thing. Sorry, it would have been if someone had used the K word to Kitty.
Right.
And, you know, I mean, it was for a lot of reasons. It was to get the primal moment across, to have her say it to an adult and have Stevie have the rational reaction and the rational response. But what's happening also is that she's a 13-year-old being swept away by passions that she doesn't know. She's really not under control. And because she's phasing all the time, she can't really punch anybody, and she knows that's wrong. So she's lashing out with the only weapon she has. And yeah, she's trying to hurt because she wants Stevie to understand how Kitty feels. and she doesn't know how to do it rationally. So it sounds so pretentious trying to writer speak the better part of a half century later, but this is, the idea was to try and move past the reader's intellect and grab them by the heart. To say, this is not, this is a story that focused on being as emotional as intellectual. This is a story where you have to understand that by the time you get, and thankfully we had 64 pages to play with, by the time you get to page 36 and the X-Men and Magneto are going out to find out what the heck's going on, you start to realize that maybe he's not the evil despot you think he is, that they think he is, that there is a reason he's doing what he's doing. One of the analogies that's often used is, as you get into the middle of the 60s, you have an evolution in both Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, that suddenly they're not as separate as once they were, that the power structures that both are facing against. Lyndon Johnson was furious with Martin Luther King for stepping out of his lane and saying Vietnam is part of the same corruption of soul that racism is. And we have to deal with both. Why are we killing people in Southeast Asia when that money could be, when that effort can be dedicated to healing the wounds at home? And Lyndon felt he was being blindsided by, what have I done wrong here? Which it's, but at the same time, you have Malcolm's confrontation with Elijah Muhammad and the Black Muslims. They don't fit into the boxes that the leaders of their flock, so to speak, want them to fit into. They need to be individuals to find their own path. And Magneto and Charlie are the same way. And that means you have the capacity to make wrong turns. But at the same time, you need to be aware that your students, for better or worse, are listening, but they are also aware that they are the next generation. Kitty is the next +1 generation. They are evolving through this conflict to find a better way to do things, which is weird. I mean, that's why for me, I was always looking ahead to what would it be in 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years when these characters are, God help us, our ages. What will the world be around them? What will it be the ideal of Jean-Luc Picard's Federation? Or will it be the slightly messier, still in development reality of Jim Kirk's, William Shatner's? It can go either way. Each has positives, each has negatives, but they are all works in progress. And the thing about God Loves is it's a work in progress from the structural point of view of this is the civilization we are in. There isn't a happy ending because there'll be another day and who knows what's going to happen next. But at least now you understand why we're doing things, why this exists, why for these characters this is important. And it has nothing to do with adversaries in skin tights.
Yeah, I think that the role of Magneto in this, in the years that followed, while you were still writing, and then other creators, Magneto working with them is not so out of the ordinary. But at this moment, everybody comes to, and they're like, "Wait, what's he doing here?" Like, which is our real threat? Is it him? My question, very specifically for you, Chris, and I probably should have researched this, but I didn't realize I was going to ask it in this way. Was it in his backstory, Magneto, we're talking about the Nazi Germany and the concentration camps, was that there before you took over in 1975? Because I felt like that was something you did, but I didn't want to take credit away if someone else had done that. So that adds such a complex layer to this character who, when we meet him, he's like, here's my band of evil mutants, my brotherhood of evil mutants, excuse me.
But see, when Stan and Jack created him, that was the dynamic of comics. You had the Avengers, therefore you have to have an evil group. You have Batman, therefore you have the Joker. You have the Fantastic Four because they're fantastic, but you also have Doctor Doom. And it's like, okay. And the X-Men have Magneto. Team of heroes, team of villains. The thing is, when I took over, Len Wein had just created them, the new guys, gal. Nothing was there. They had origins. In Len's conception, Wolverine was 24. The claws were part of the gloves. He was a wild, he was a badass kid. And, the thing with when I took over, which was the next issue, and I'd sat in on the creation of Giant Size 1, much to Len's annoyance. My desk was right outside his office. I'd sneak in because Dave Cockrum's art was just too damn beautiful. And I was intrigued. But he drew Logan as that was not a 20-year-old, the way Dave drew him. And then suddenly, I think it was 5 months later, when we were doing 97, 98, he comes in with a sketch on the back of a page of Wolverine with his hand like this and the claws coming out of his hand. And I looked at this and I said, oh, that's the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. That's beautiful. Because it's suddenly, wham. Okay, adamantium claws coming out of the glove, big deal. It's like Iron Man's armor. Anyone can put on the gloves, anybody can. But suddenly, to have adamantium come out of his hand, it's like, oh my God. How did they get, there has to be some sort of framing, locking mechanism, a projector inside his arm. I mean, these things are actually longer than his forearm, depending on who's drawing them.
I was just going to say, depending on the artist, sometimes they're much longer.
Welcome to reality. Others, yeah. I mean, the fact that X-23 has claws coming out of the front of her foot and the heel. I mean, what do they make a left turn at the ankle? It's just, okay, not my department. But even, I used to look at anatomy pictures, but there you go.
I want to interject with something very quickly. I've talked to you a number of times in the last decade, and I usually don't dwell on things that happened when you weren't in charge, but I've never thought to ask you this, but it seems relevant now. You'd been away from the characters for a few years, and I think it's in Wolverine 75, and I think it's Larry Hama comes up with the idea that, Magneto rips the adamantium out of his body, and he had the bone claws. Now, was that one of those for you, like, oh, what are they doing to this guy? Or, oh, wow, that's really cool. That's not, do you think it's a cool thing that they added, or do you feel like, no, that's not really where I was coming from?
No, I think it was Larry and I were on the same page.
Okay. Oh, wow.
No, I always knew he had claws. Yeah. It's just, we never had an opportunity to use them. Right. I mean, if it were me, I would have left him that way from then on. But oddly enough, that's why in the issue you were showing off of True Friends, when Wolverine shows up in issue 2 using his claws, we
In
never
1936,
specify
by the
what
way.
they are.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, Rick drew them as they're smooth and cool, but we never identify them. But yeah, they're his claws. He is a feral hominid. That was also back in the day when I knew that his parents were Sabretooth and Seraph, who runs the Princess Bar, because Seraph is a fallen angel, and Sabretooth's attitude was, "Ain't seen one of them before. Let's get it on." And she succumbed to temptation because he's hot. But that accounts for his shortness, but also the binary nature of his personality. Half of him is a monster, and half of him is saintly, and that's why, in my conception, every year on his birthday or thereabouts, Sabretooth shows up and kills him, because no one's going to kill either of them because they both regenerate.
Yeah.
They heal really fast, but he wants his son to act like him, and is really pissed off when Logan won't, because Logan, being a kid, is screw you. I'm not going to do what you want simply because you want me to. I'm making my own life, and you got to get used to it. So it's, again, but that was when I had a measure of control over reality, and
yeah, no, I won't talk about anything in the 2000s, Chris. I just that one story point. I've always wondered what you thought of it. I thought I couldn't have been more surprised when I read that, and I'm like, oh, he had the claws all along. Yeah, but to get us back into focus, you similarly were able to add to the character of Magneto, from what had come before 1975.
Yeah, but I mean, that's, again, bearing in mind, this is 1975, so 1945 is 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So they're both men in their 50s. Bingo. That means he was born in the 30s. He comes to Auschwitz as a kid. He is defined by growing up in Auschwitz. And there you go. That's everything. And after the war, he spends, John Bolton and I did in a couple of stories, he worked briefly for the Shin Bet, going out and hunting Nazis, until he ran into Nazis that had been hired by the CIA.
Yeah.
And suddenly he's looking at, wait, the guy from the CIA who I worked with is actually defending these Nazis. Well, times change. We're going for the moon. We needed, we have our German rocket scientists. The Russians have their German rocket scientists. Why are you so upset? Well, because I was in the camps. Well, get over it. Elie Wiesel became a writer. What do what's so special about you? Well, Magneto, again, both he and Scott are physically damaged people, and they're established in their past that they have, Scott got thrown, his parents tossed him out of a plane with Alex. Sadly, Scott landed on his head. He's got brain damage. What does it affect? His ability to control his eye beams. Normally, it would be a function of will. Now they're on all the time. The same with Magneto. He is defined by being in the camp, escaping with a woman he loves, who loves him, and building a new life for themselves, sadly, on the eastern side of the wall. And it all comes apart, because even there, he's an outsider. The double implication are he's an outsider because, you came from a camp. That means you're either liberal. Okay, you've got a wife, so you're not gay. That means you must be that religion. So there is an element of prejudice against him, outsiderness against him. And then when his powers manifest, bingo. So for him, the moment where his sweetie, there's something, we should do a brain scan to find out why you have these headaches. Maybe we can fix it. And then she gets killed by the CIA guy. Every moment of hope in his life gets snatched away from him by someone who feels more committed to a greater real world cause. And his attitude is, screw that. If you're going to take this attitude towards everyone like me, I mean, oddly enough, this is the moment in the film version of Days of Future Past where I'm looking at this and going, huh? Because when Hugh Jackman goes back to the 70s and they're trying to find Mystique, and what's she doing? She's freeing mutants who got drafted and are in Vietnam. And I'm going, I'm out. We have mutants in Vietnam? Yes. Why aren't we winning?
Yeah, exactly.
Eric,
this might seem like an odd time for me to.
We'll just throw in this neat bit.
Yeah.
But then you've got to connect the dots. If you're going to have mutant special forces, then either the Viet Cong have mutant special forces of their own, or you can't just do a throwaway. And I mean, it was cool, but that's a whole different primal story of its own. And if you're going to define the war in those terms, then how many times have we done stories, films about the war, Vietnam, where the story is defined by racial animus between black soldiers and white soldiers until somebody starts shooting. And then we're all, we'll shoot back together. That was the reality. And then you come home and you've got a powerful anti-war movement that doesn't like you. But that's a story in and of itself that would be a lot of fun to play with. But if you're going to do Days of Future Past, I mean, there was so much about that was right. I mean, for once, an X-Men movie actually paid attention to the original concept. But in the process, damn, if we could only have played a little or found a way to play a little with the other stuff, maybe not in this film, but done another film alongside it. But for me, that was what the X canon was all about. It's not, the beauty of it is mutant could stand in for so much else in the real world. Aspects of relationships, aspects of prejudice, aspects of society. That for me is what I loved, which is I could step out there with stories that readers then and now could relate to on personal levels, and not think of it as a comic book story, but as a story. And that, for me, is what this is all about. I'm not writing comic book stories. I'm writing stories that are presented, or I'm trying to write stories that are presented in a graphic arts format that is maybe, okay, it's 100 panels an issue, and maybe if we had a bigger budget, we could do movies that way, or TV series. For me, X-Men would be much, much better as an ongoing TV series. 6 or 12 episodes a season, because then you could watch them grow as the cast of Hogwarts did. But more importantly, you could keep it relevant to the outside world on a continuing basis. The trouble with films is you've only got 2 hours. Well, now 2.5, not 3.5, depending on which Avatar you're watching.
Unless Zach Snyder's directing, then you have 4.
I actually watched that movie. It was actually 4 hours of the same movie done 3 times.
To that point, by the way, Chris, I feel like for most people my age and younger, the definitive on-screen portrayal of the X-Men seems to be the animated series, because obviously that was Saturday morning cartoons, so there are limitations. But the characters, you became so much more invested with them because I think it was over like 5 seasons. So
Well,
I think
and they did adapt one of my story. They did adapt Phoenix,
yeah.
and they gave me credit for it, which, you know, I'll take.
Yeah.
Yeah, forgive me for butting in.
No, please.
I liked it a lot, and I got my X-Men baseball hat out of it.
Oh,
When they
nice.
were canceled, formerly on X-Men, which
Yeah.
I thought was really cool. Now they're back in sync again.
Yeah.
But the challenge with animated is everything, literally everything, depends on the vocal actor. And the thing I loved about Batman was they had the best character actors who had great voices in Hollywood. And I remember the very first animated X series, and they had a Wolverine who was the most Australian sounding Canadian I've ever heard. And I was like, really? Come on. I mean, and the problem is that Saturday morning doesn't give you a lot of opportunity to do character. And yeah, it's prejudice on my part, and it's unjustified. But sorry, I'm a snob. And I liked, was it Gen X? The series that was like 3 years ago, set in Atlanta.
Yeah, that's right. You had a cameo.
I had, God help me,
I
a
remember
cameo,
talking
yes.
to you at that time,
ranting about mutants.
I forget what that show was called.
Yeah, everybody
It's
did.
so
That's
funny.
the sad thing.
I used to talk about it every week on YouTube as part of a show, and I can't remember what the show is called now, but
No,
yeah, but yeah, they had Polaris on it, and initially
Yeah.
she didn't have green hair, but then they fixed that. So
Oh, is it the
Gifted.
Gifted?
Gifted.
Okay, yes. Right when you said
Sorry.
Polaris, I
See,
knew.
they didn't put an X in it, so I'm like, wait, how can I remember what that show was called?
well, some people are gifted, some TV series aren't. No, but I mean, this is, I think again, the challenge, the core challenge of God Loves was, how can we synergize all this in 64 pages? And, and then again, reality stepped in, because it was in no way meant to be the 6th graphic novel. We were supposed to be further down the line, but other people screwed up their deadlines, and Brent, when called upon, can produce like a bandit. And he did. So we had to slam it out in faster than the proverbial speeding bullet. Same thing happened with New Mutants. I mean, that was originally the first issue, except that we expanded it and threw it into a graphic novel because we were there, and poor Bob could do the work. Bob McLeod could do the work. But that's the reality of comics, of publishing. It's no matter what your intent, you can always get screwed up by reality. And it's a good paradigm for life, and certainly mutant life. But again, the whole point is, why should we care? Because the story ideally brings the characters to a sufficiency of life that the readers fall in love. Because that's, if you're not in love with Romeo and Juliet as an audience by the end of the first act or the first scene, forget about it. You're not going to care about the love story if you aren't swept up with it yourself. I mean, the reality of the film, the classic film version has it there. If you're not when the Queen comes out at the end and says, "Love doesn't triumph over all. Next time, write me something funny." Shakespeare. It's you've got to grab them right from the start, and you've got to hold on and make them want a certain ending and either give it to them or not, but have the reader satisfied that they got what they wanted, or like shocked that they didn't, but able to see it and, oh God, oh, Phoenix died. Ah, damn. But what a way to go. Or the team persuaded Charlie not to join Magneto. But you see why Magneto is doing what he's doing, why Charlie, when Eric holds out his hand, is reaching back, because, maybe you're right. And, 100 issues later, it happens in reverse, with Magneto taking Charlie's hand. And I'm not a good teacher, but, I said yes, and I can't betray my word, and I can't abandon these kids. And what will happen next? What will happen next, obviously, is what's happening now, which is like, huh? But that's a whole different discussion.
I'm glad you brought it back to Magneto, because Eric, this might seem like an unusual time for me to ask you to plug the documentary film you made, but it's relevant. I think take a moment to talk about the film that you produced, the documentary, and then I have a question as it relates to this book.
Sure. So I was a producer on a documentary called Other Voices. Its other title was Azlat Acherim, which is a combination of Hebrew and Arabic. And it was about a group of unlikely friends across the Gaza border who are striving for peace amidst all the chaos that you can imagine that happens there. And it's interesting when I went to Israel and I met some of them, I kept using that term. Like, even when you think of how do you market a documentary, like unlikely friendship sounds dramatic. But then you realize, like, these guys were neighbors. And then a wall was put between them. But for years, separate from the politics of the nations, they were friends. They were neighbors. Just like it's not unlikely that I'd be friendly with the person who lives next door to me. And of course, like the themes of X-Men, and really what you're saying before too, Chris, about this, I think, what made me as a kid always want to read that, first and foremost. We had a place called Books and Tobacco. It's a sign of the times.
And, a great place for children to hang out, by the way.
Oh yeah, all the time. Hey, listen, you learn how to do lots of things in that store that are important.
Yeah, I'll take the new issue of X-Men and a container of Skull, please.
Yeah. Can I get a little fatty, please, for the road? But I would read these, and it wasn't just about Cyclops and Storm and Phoenix. It was also about Jean and Kitty and Scott. And I love, by the way, that you call him Charlie. But that we knew them as like these characters. So the decisions they would make, like, it's almost like the soap opera part of comic books, but the part that's human. It's the part that made us fall in love with these characters and want to stick with them through hundreds and hundreds of issues. And, and I think this graphic novel is such a beautiful reminder of that at the end of it all, it is the children shall lead, as you put in there. And watching Scott kind of grow up a little bit was interesting. I know Christian and I are big fans of Cyclops, so seeing him actually remind us all.
he gets a bad rep, largely for creators other than you, Chris. Decisions that were not made by you have forever shaded the way that people think of the character. But Eric actually texted me this earlier today for our visual audience. This sort of passage where It's like, oh, we've won. And Scott points out that no, this is where the fight really starts. It's the most Scott moment that you can that I can personally think of, and the fact that you see Logan, Aurora, Kitty, and Kurt are like, well, yeah, of course we're gonna follow you. So to that point, though, Eric, I think it's really a time for Scott to shine, right?
Right, and I think too, it's interesting because you have this moment, and then the moment later on when he really gives that impassioned speech, and you could just see, his humanity coming out, but really how his humanity represents a piece of Charles that, for a moment, was blinded by what he had just gone through, and so, and it's interesting because Chris, I never really thought about. I mean, you're obviously. You know these characters a little better than us. And the idea that Scott has brain damage, I never really thought about his condition as that. But, I always went back to like how he had to have more willpower than most because his power left untreated would be the most damaging of all. Even X-Men 1 had a throwaway line that I actually liked where it was about, in essence, like, Logan's making fun of him and Jean basically defends him. It's like if he doesn't wear those glasses, he could like tear a hole through this whole building. And what that does to a character, if you have that power, which is a bit of a curse compared to the others, and what that wouldn't do to you as a person to be able to control that for every waking second of your life. So, yeah, I have always gone back to Scott and to Cyclops as, for me, that was the X-Men character. When we were playing in the playground, I always wanted to be him, even though now I look more like Logan. But I very much understood Scott quite a bit.
Well, I mean, for me, that was the whole evolution with the Maddie Pryor arc, which is where she, they're on a date, sort of. And she wants to see his face without the glasses. And she reaches up to take them off. And that's when he reacts and explains to her why he never takes them off. But for me, it was always, how does he deal with sleeping? I mean, does he tape glasses, gym glasses around his face, elastic band? What happens if he rolls over and they get knocked off his face? For him, there is no moment of relaxation. It's sort of like the silly thing in, I guess it's Bat Soup, where they're fighting. One of the few good scenes in Batman Superman is where Clark comes home and Lois is in the bath and he just climbs in, and it's really nice. They have a relationship. Way cool. What exactly does that mean? I mean, she's only a person. I mean, she's a normal person, and he is, after all, Superman, which is great. But one false move, and goodness gracious, there's not much left of her. And it's the same reality for Cyclops. How, in a way, being with Jean was the perfect out, because she can control him. She can grab that part of his mind and either keep his eyes closed or keep his glasses from shifting. Oh, she's also a telekinetic. She can keep his glasses from shifting. They can have all the fun. And that's why when John and when she's Phoenix and they're in the Southwest, and she and Scott go off to have a nice night by themselves, and she reaches up to take off his glasses, and no, don't do that. Don't worry, you'll be cool. I'll make sure of it. And she takes off his glasses, and he realizes, oh my God, how powerful is she? Because the thing everyone has to bear in mind is think of what's going on to generate these constant beams of awesome power. He can punch holes through mountains, God knows what else. Without, it takes him a lot of effort to run out of gas. That represents an awesome amount of force. The psychological consequences are almost, if not more, relevant than the physical consequences, because I can't let myself go no matter what because of the damage I could cause, the people I might hurt or, God forbid, kill. How can he ever have a normal life? And even if he has a normal life, how can he ever risk having kids? You know, I mean, I guess that's why it, in a way, it makes sense that Emma's the one who, at least for the first 15 years of the century, ends up as his sweetie, because she can keep him under control in every sense of the word. But from a purely psychological standpoint, that is such a terrifying and humbling circumstance for him. He can't ever relax. He can't ever be spontaneous. He can't ever, I mean, that was in a way the point of that scene with Maddie that Paul and I did, where he just takes the coin and then zaps it. And he's got this perfect little circle in the coin. And he's explaining it to her, and he knows that's going to end the relationship. And her reaction is, wow, I'm glad you told me. And it's like, wow, you cool with that? It's, you know, it's part of you. I care for you. It's all encompassing. And in a way, that's the first, I was trying to demonstrate, that's the first time he's ever met someone who deals with him as a person, as a human being, not as an object. And that's why, for me, it was so important, especially once the baby comes along, that I wanted that to be consequent. I wanted there to be a happy ending. I wanted him to leave and have a life and be available to come back. That's why my point to Jim Shooter was, when the X Factor decision was made, after I'd blown up and had a rant over the weekend and calmed down, fine. If you want to do X Factor, bring Scott back. Bring Maddie back as his wife with the baby, with Frank, and have them, it's like he's been re-upped for another tour of duty. That's great from a character structure, for me anyway. That creates a whole new dynamic of potential arcs about him, about his role. But you could even bring in Rachel down the line if you want, except bringing in Jean's big sister as the unattached person who's the one who finds the New Mutants. That's even better, because then you have something for Hank and Bobby and Aaron and Warren to do. If you just bring back Jean, it's the same old dynamic and it's boring, which it, much except for Walt and Wheezy, it turned out to be.
Yeah, they did a very quick about face. There's I think Louise Simonson comes on in like issue 6, and you look at those first few and you're like, they're kind of like the Ghostbusters. They have these matching uniforms, and you're just like, oh, this is a really bad idea. The early issues of X Factor.
No, it's why, and John was really sort of pissed. John Byrne was really pissed when I blew up and went into Shooter. I had a lot of blow ups in those days. Went into Shooter's office and said, if we don't fix the flashback, I'm done. You cannot throw out 5 years of X-Men continuity on a whim, especially for a team that's basically saying, screw you, we thought that was a bad decision, we're going to fix it. And so I rewrote it to make sure that the Phoenix was the Phoenix that I'd created with Dave, not what John wanted to morph it into. But that's the dynamic of comics, where you have a whole bunch of people working in a group circumstance, and we're all, like it or not, subservient to a much higher authority. And this basically goes back to Walt Disney's reality, which is when the original 7 animators wanted a raise and said, if we'll go on strike, and he said, fine, go on strike, I'll fire you all and hire 7 more people, and in a year no one will remember. And it being the 30s and there weren't being a lot of animation jobs, they figured he's got a point, so they caved. And in a way, comics has been, modern American comics, whether DC or Marvel, has been defined by much the same attitude. There's always going to be more people wanting to come into the business, and there are. And being part of Disney sort of ingrains it deeper. The problem is that, no, I mean, realistically, I should have been out of here 30 years ago. No, I mean, I'm not being facetious. I'm just
no, you were. I mean, you were, and
I mean, they fired Stan.
Yeah, right.
I mean, of all the crazy things, who'd have thought? What did he do? Well, he only created the universe that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, I look at it and say, I can pick up any issue of the FF today, and it's the same the same core FF I read 50 years ago. Same with Spider-Man, same to an extent with the Avengers. At least the core characters are the same.
Yeah.
The X-Men is nothing like it was 5 years ago, let alone 30. Not the characters aren't, and it's, you could not do God Loves today simply because the reality of the fictional environment in which the X canon exists does not lend itself to that story. But since none of them live in the real world anyway, or anything approaching the real world, the conflict wouldn't happen. Stryker could indeed run for president and win. The X-Men would just withdraw to Krakoa, and that's okay. That's nice. We won't help you. You won't help us. Who cares?
Yeah.
We still basically run the world, like it or not. There are more of us than there are Avengers, except for the fact they blew up Mars last year. There used to be 2 million more of us on Mars. And Storm's the planetary or solar system representative to the stellar Congress or whatever the hell it is.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot in the modern continuity that I think, I feel like even 10 years after the story doesn't work in the same way. It's not, you're very specific. The extended cut of this, there's an interview where you kind of explain that it's not tied into the continuity. It's not like between issue 160 and 161. I'm just picking numbers out of the sky. Not that that's when it would have been, but the idea, and that lends itself to the cinematic quality, because you can watch an X-Men movie without having read, hundreds of comics. So reading this one, I think, goes a long way to that. It does feel a little bit because of the characters who were in it. People like Jeff, you read this, and there's no Rogue. Obviously, this is a long time before Gambit. There's characters that I think you're familiar with that you're like, oh, okay, this is the group that we get. But I don't think, at least I'm going to assume, Jeff, it didn't take away from you that it's like, oh, okay, these are these characters who but they're not necessarily who you're used to seeing from watching on the screen.
Exactly. Yeah, like you said exactly. Like even for Kitty, her whole costume is totally different in the comics than what they do from what I've seen. But
Kitty did have a few different. She had a few false starts when it came. I like this one. I liked the eye makeup.
Yeah.
I thought it was kind of cool. But anyway, finish your thought, Jeff.
But
Sorry.
yeah, no, I mean, there's just it's different characters, different styles, different looks, but no, it still had the same heart and same theme. So I really enjoyed it. But yeah, it's to your point. They've changed so many different characters, storylines, different people in the X-Men. So it's cool to see like the origin.
Sure. The interesting thing is, it's like all the crazy things about comic continuity have morphed over into film continuity. It's like Hugh Jackman announcing, "Yes, my being with Deadpool is my 10th appearance as Logan." Huh? We're counting all those? Well,
Yeah.
yes, it's like the current run of what it's sort of like Ms. Marvel, especially if you've seen the last episode, relates to Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel relates to Nick Fury. Which relates to the entire first 20 films of the Marvel canon. You have to see them all, otherwise you won't understand what the dickens is going on. I'm sorry, who's Thanos?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, for goodness sakes. And the same thing apparently seems to be happening with Avatar. It's like, you don't have to see every James Bond movie to understand James Bond. Give us a break, for crying out loud. I know you want to watch.
Please make sure to please make sure to keep people from watching Quantum of Solace. Just off the top of my head, the Daniel Craig movies are much better when you don't see that one.
Yeah, this is your only warning.
No, it wasn't. Look, Daniel Craig was really good.
Yeah,
and I'm sorry, Judi Dench, best M ever. Although in her funeral, in her memorials, no, in Bond's memorial at the end of
Skyfall.
No. The last one.
The most No Time to Die.
No time. What?
The latest one was No Time to Die, I believe.
Right. When they're all toasting him, and you see over M's shoulder a picture of Judi Dench at the But on her right is a picture of the first M from
Dr. No.
Dr. No.
Yeah.
And I'm suddenly thinking, oh geez. So it's an infinite, it's an ongoing thing. And that was the brilliant. One of my sons had it, but someone else had it as well. Oh, so when you become 007, you automatically become James Bond. It's like that's how they get around all the new actors.
Yeah.
Okay, Jane Bond, or it's an actress who likes being called James. I don't know. It's a new era.
Hey, it's definitely a new era.
Yeah, it's the same with Doctor Who. It doesn't matter. I am the Doctor. Who? Yes. What?
Yes.
No. Who?
Exactly.
But I think we knew when we were doing it, it's a moment of time. It's watching a Daniel Radcliffe Bond and comparing it to a Sean Connery Bond. It's sitting here having watched the lady Doctor Who, and suddenly she turns into, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Which I think
Jodie Whittaker regenerates as David Tennant, who is a previous incarnation.
David Tennant was brilliant, and the fact that they're bringing back apparently their what's her face, the lady,
Catherine Tate. Yeah,
Catherine Tate. Thank you. My brain is totally gone. I think it's a great idea. My problem is, can't you just stick around for like 2 or 3 years? I mean, you guys were great. But the fact also is that now that the Doctor's been established as his own continuity, divorced from the Time Lords, indeed Doctor is the origin of the Time Lords. Okay, it makes my head explode, but what the hell? I'll go with it. You can go on, we'll come back eventually for the 100th Doctor in, 50 years or so.
Yeah.
God bless the BBC for at least coming up with a solution. The point is, God Loves is a moment of time. It's a very specific moment of time. It has no coherent relevance to the current continuity, even though the next to last arc of Extreme was a Stryker story. I thought it wasn't a bad Stryker story, actually. But the moment I did it, I ended it with Stryker realizing his mistakes and being a man of God, deciding to heal himself the best way he knows how. Within like 2 months, he shows up in another title as psychotic and evil as he ever was, which he never was.
Right.
So it's the reality of mainstream comics is no matter how good you do, no matter how seminal the stories may be considered that you write, the day after you leave, someone's going to change it. And that's the reality. So on the one hand, thank goodness it's in print. Thank goodness people are still capable of enjoying it. Thank God I can still blush because it's like, wow, you really like it? Golly. There's not a writer alive who, when I just read your book. Yeah, it was great. Oh, thank God.
Yeah.
Or it sucked, dude. Oh, this is my son. He's going to punch you now because I'm not supposed to do that sort of thing. Or better yet, this is my daughter. She's going to punch you.
Yeah.
That's the reality of storytelling and of publishing. There will always be someone's always going to do a production of 1776 that you'll sit there watching and, didn't see that one coming. Maybe not. Sorry, I saw it. It could have been better. The Broadway show.
Yeah.
The new all-female, like mostly female cast or all-female cast? All female. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It was all non-gender specific, let us say.
I see.
And as a concept, it might have worked. I could see where, let's give it a shot. What the hell? But that's what's done to Shakespeare every other day. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But the plays are still there. No matter what anyone does to the X-Men, Stan's issues are still there. Roy Thomas and Neil Adams issues are still there. My issues are still there. Grant Morrison's issues are still there. You can like what you like or not like what you like. I tend to take it personally because I'm still here. Yeah. And I am as arrogantly egocentric as ever, and I've yet to cease to read. Well, Grant's like, okay, I thought they were totally wrong, but I couldn't stop reading them, which to me that's great writing.
Yeah.
But even when Frank was doing Daredevil and I was reading it and going, damn, he's good, my next thought was, okay, I'll do better. Because that's writing. We don't do this.
Hold my drink.
Huh?
Well, you're just, well, yeah, I guess elaborate, Eric.
What the idea of like, you did good, but well, hold my drink.
Let me show you
how
thing too. Is that what you're saying?
No. Actually, where I get it from is, oh God. John Barrymore was on Broadway. This is back in the 30s. It was one of his last productions, and he was drunk as shit. Sorry. Drunk as a skunk. And a fellow British actor was down the street doing Hamlet. And everyone was saying, oh, it's wonderful, it's beautiful, it's yada, yada, yada. They had different days off. And he found out that the actor was coming to see his performance. It was like he was doing the 20th century, on the 20th century, or something like that. And they're going right along, and he found out exactly where he was sitting. And so Barrymore, in the middle of the play, stops and just stands there for a moment on stage. And everyone's like, what? Oh my God, he's lost his mind again. And then he turns around and he does, oh God. The most primal speech from Hamlet. And he's staring right at the actor. And he does it perfectly. It was like Barrymore at the peak of his powers. It was like the audience sitting there, what? And he does the speech and he ends it. And he looks on. And that, Mr. Blah, is how it should be done. Turned around, walked off stage, walked out of the theater. That was it. And the audience was ready to give a standing ovation just for that.
Yeah.
But and not that I'm as ego. Yeah, I probably am. But really not as strong, that's for sure. But my point is, I have a vision of these characters. I believe it's the right vision. I really don't care about everybody else's vision. If I'm invited to play in their sandbox, I will happily play in their sandbox, and I will try my living best to do it better. But my point when Salva and I were doing Extreme this arc, I wanted it to be so good and sell so well that even Marvel would have to say, oh God, we've got to bring him back. Damn it. Because writers are egotists, and we sit alone in our room with our little computers and our stupid keyboards, and we want to write. We want to tell stories. We want to go places we'd never been, do things we wouldn't dare doing, be adventurous in a way that, looking at me, oh God, you're really old. No, that's Clive Cussler. You know, that's why so many writers end up hiring their sons to take over the mantle. And the sons never last that long because they're not the same writer.
Sure.
Mine sensibly have gone into like far more interesting careers, which I won't, which make me jealous. But it's just, if I'm going to write a story, I want it to be better than I've done before. And I want me to be better than anybody else who's ever done it. Whether it happens or not, I have no idea, but that's what I'm aiming for when I set sail. And if I'm going to ask you to spend $4.99 to buy a copy of it, or $25.99 to buy the compendium, or $35.99 if it's a hardcover, please God. No, I mean, it's like when I want it to be worth your time. I want it to be worth the $5. I want you to get to the last page and sit there going, what the hell happens next? The best compliment I ever got was to discover that people were lining up outside the door of the comic book shop on the third Thursday of every month because they didn't want to wait to get their copy. They wanted to find out what the hell was happening next right then. And I thought, wow, that is so cool. And it is. That's what we all live for. That's why we sit and, write, to have someone be so excited that A, they'll buy it, but B, they'll want to buy the next one, that they'll enjoy the 30 minutes it took them to read it. And wow, this is really interesting. I never thought of that before. Because that defined the stories that I loved. What better rationale is there to sit down and stare at a screen and start coming up with ideas and bring them to fruition? And then better yet, have an artist turn them into visuals that are so gorgeous. Wow, we can't stop here. You're too good. I got to come up with something better to make you even better. Let's see what we can do next. But that is such a 20th century concept. The 21st century seems to be bound in a different direction. God help them. But, it's like, and for the crassest of reasons, I figure if Ike Perlmutter is going to get Disney, if Disney's going to pay me money, I want to earn that back and more, for the simple reason that if I can make myself valuable to them, then they'll reimburse me accordingly, and we can all live happily ever after. Is it capitalism? You betcha. And sorry, I've been laid off more than once in this business. Not fun. But on the other hand, I've also seen the faces of people that have stood in line for 2 hours or more, God help us, to get autographs because they love the book. I've had people in effing Moscow in tears because they've read the story and it means something to them. If people are going to react that way, then my obligation in return is to do the next story better and better and better. I figure it's a fair dynamic. If along the way I'm paying my mortgage, great. But it's that we've now been sitting here for quite a while. My wife's going to kill me.
Oh, your wife's going to kill me. I was
yeah, you're
because I said don't worry. I'll focus on a time that was
yeah, you can
40
focus
minutes ago.
You can focus all you like, but I talk too much. But the fact that 40 plus years after I wrote this stupid story, that you guys are sitting here talking to me about it, that you guys are telling me how much you enjoyed it and how much or little it meant to you, that people are texting at the same time, God help them, is extraordinarily flattering. It's fundamentally cool, but it's also a challenge. It's like, okay, am I what I was a half century ago? Do I have the capacity to be anything like that now? Or can I be better? Well, let's take a shot and see what happens next. It's, the defining moment, I guess, is the best hitter in baseball misses 6 out of 10. It's like, that's kind of scary. In the overall scheme of things, you figure they'd at least do better, but no, he misses 6 times. He or she misses 6 times out of 10. So that gives you an idea of the parameters. You look at football and you think the average football player doesn't last 3 years and ends up probably with physical complications that will haunt the rest of his life. But people still want to play the game. At least in European football, they last longer because they're just running around and bopping balls with their heads. Thank goodness.
Yeah, they don't even need helmets.
Can you imagine American football at 90 minutes, nonstop, without commercials?
Nonstop.
Yes.
No.
That's just me being from across the pond.
Well,
but
Chris,
you have to look at things in an uber sense, like a grand scheme. And the grand scheme is each story is a step. And ideally, you want to make the step along a rising curve. But if I'm going to be lucky enough to have people read my stuff, then I want to keep creating stuff that will keep them coming back for more, and ideally telling their friends that, yeah, he may be an old fart, but this stuff is really good. Give it a shot. Give it a shot. And ideally inspire whoever comes after, grabs the same characters or the same books to come up with something better that in an ideal world would make me, even if I hated every page, want to see what's coming next from them. Because it's a competition. It always was. And the sad thing for me was that Stan's attitude when I got hired was, 3 rules of comics. Do good work. Get your work in on time. Don't be a pain in my ass. Because I'm too busy trying to save the company. Any 2 out of 3, you can keep your job. I prefer all 3. But, I'll take what I can get. And
yeah. And although the generations that have followed have put a lot less focus on the get your work in on time, that seemed to have been something that was much. I know, but I don't want to get you in any more trouble with your wife, but I do want to
finish off
Jeff
quickly.
Oh, sure, go ahead. Sorry.
One of the things when I was working there as a gopher, that was what interns were before they were interns. We had a finished book come in, about to go to press, and Roy, being the functional editor-in-chief, Roy Thomas, read it and pulled it because for him it was not of sufficient quality. And the art was pretty good. I never got a chance to read the script because he pulled it. That would never happen today. Well, theoretically, it would be, we'd have a meeting, it would never get written, they would never get written or pitched or whatever, depending on who your editor was. But those were the rules back then. That, you had to print 300,000 copies to sell 150,000. Anything under 100,000 was considered dead, not worth publishing. Again, life has changed since then. But the key thing was to do good work and keep the readers coming back for more. And the way to keep the readers coming back to more, theoretically, was to write really cool stories. The reason I'm here is because when I was in 11th grade, I walked in to the local coffee shop, diner, and they had a rack of comics. And I picked up FF48. And I thought, I'll give it a read. And I was like, this is cool. So I picked up 49. Wow, Galactus is cool. Wow. Reed's going to shave before, because if it's the end of the world, I want to look my best. And then FF50 was a slightly larger issue. And Johnny Storm went off to college. And I thought, so what happens next? And I figure if I could get hooked that easily, this could be fun. But I know I'm saying the same thing over and over again, but it's like I'll keep trying till I get it right, or till everybody starts listening. We're a serial medium. We're all about people buying it on a regular basis and wanting to see what happens next, not doing it out of habit, not doing it because I want to keep my collection. I want to, and not doing a 35 issue continued story that requires you to read laterally across every book in the line and then bounce back and start over again the next. It's like, great, gimmick yourself, fine, do 300 covers. Big deal. I want a story. I want characters I can fall in love with. I want people that look and act like the people I see, like you guys, like the people on the street, like a world that has relevance. If I want to see Metropolis and Star City, I'll go read DC. This is the thing about Marvel, was it's always in New York or San Francisco or Boston or Salem Center. Yeah, it's a fictional town, but it's a real dot on the map. I just embellished. That's what we do. I'm a writer. Because if you do it that way, if the people fall in love with the characters, they'll stick around. They'll care. And if the reader cares, then the writer has to care. Because otherwise, you're breaking your reader. You're not only breaking the contract you're building with the readers, that if you invest your money and your time, I'll give you something worth it. But you're hurting the characters and they can't fight back, And that's why the frustration is that, yeah, I created a whole bunch of characters and I love them all. So loving them all, it hurts when they're not themselves, but it hurts when readers don't like them as much anymore. I want them to be happy. I'm going to put them through hell, but I want them to be happy. It's like, okay, Rogue and Remy have been together for a long time. So what's next? At least after a long time, Reed and Sue had a kid. Almost had 2 kids. Kind of, sort of, almost. Oh, wait, they did have a 3rd kid. It gets complicated, I know.
Well, at a certain point, yeah, the story.
Well, that's the problem. The problem is that now everybody's suddenly getting older. And it's like, really? Okay. We're the X-Men. We're going to come save you.
There was that argument.
I'm just rambling now, but the point is, it's a love affair between the writer and the readers as much as between characters in the book. Yeah. And there are good times and there are bad times. But at its fundamental basis, you want everybody, readers and writer, even the publishers, to live happily ever after. And also want to see what happens next. And to me, if you follow that line, ideally, in the final analysis, you can't go wrong, because you're true to your heart and the readers ideally will be true to their heart. And the creepy thing is, but wonderful thing is, I'm on my 3.5 generation. You have no idea how weird that is.
Well, yeah,
but wonderful.
To all of that, this year it'll be 40 years since I bought my first comics. I was 7 when I bought my first comics, one of which Uncanny X-Men 176. Scott fights a giant squid in the ocean. And my son is now 7. He'll turn 8 this year. And so that idea just blows my mind, and I think that, in the 90s, there was this idea of the characters were getting too old. Peter Parker was in grad school. He had a wife. Let's make him younger. I was like, I don't know. I fell in love with that character at the age of 7, and he was in his late 20s or however old he was. And I was like, I didn't need any of that. I liked seeing them evolve. And Chris, I know that we have talked for a long time, and I know you're already in trouble with your wife, and I know I do. But I want to give Eric and Jeff a chance to get in with any final thoughts. Eric, I'll let you go first. Anything you wanted to make sure to get to from God Loves Man Kills, X-Men in general, or we also covered Star Trek, Doctor Who, James Bond.
And 3 hours later, we're still at it.
But we haven't really talked about George Lazenby, which is really where I want to go next. The
one off George
Bond.
Lazenby did. Which one did he do though? It was
On Her
Oh,
Majesty's
you mean
Secret
the one?
Service.
Yeah,
Her Majesty's Secret Service. Yeah,
The one off
Bond
Bond.
that I wanted, that they got everything right except Bond.
yeah.
Can you imagine Sean Connery doing that? Him and Diana
Yeah.
Rigg. Oh,
Oh,
I know.
so George Lazenby aside, Eric, please.
By the way,
see,
I
there
have in
thought you
front of
meant
me.
the Republican congressman from Long Island, the other George.
Oh yeah. Well, I
Of the
think he
jungle.
claims he was one of the Bonds as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
You
by the
know-
way, I have number 177 in my hand, Uncanny X-Men. So, I guess you and I do
Spoiler
have
alert! Spoiler alert! That's not Kitty. She's not dead.
Well, thanks for nothing.
Sorry.
But I just want to say thank you so much for joining us, really. And this idea of like generations of readers, and for yourself as well, Christian, as a father, like, I mean, part of the joy of this, and the serialized nature of the storytelling is, I remember it was part of a routine, and you had to know what happened next. And you're right, it wasn't like you needed to buy this and this and this and this to figure it out, but rather there were core characters, and you stuck with them, and you changed with them. Look at that. All right, I'll buy that one, I promise.
Yeah, that's.
I'll buy. I now have my own credit card. I don't have to steal one from a parent to go buy a hardback. But
Helps
there
build
is
strong
such a
bodies.
joy. Yeah, well, there's such a joy of sharing these stories with my sons and watching them turn into their own variations of superhero fans.
Can
So
you tell
it
me
really is, and managed to survive not one but two Jewish women in my life, my mom and my wife, that I still have these. It's very dogged and worn, but definitely read and loved, and it's still part of my life 40 years later. So thank you for giving multiple
I was talking
Connors.
earlier about how I'm in the process of moving to a new house. And right
God.
now in my future living room is, I think, 20 bankers boxes of comics from that era, because I can't go put them in my office because I don't have the right shelves and I don't want them to get wet. And I'm like, I've moved with them across country. I need to take care of them. And the reason I walked away, if you want to talk about things that were worth investing in, Chris, I remember I talked to you about this a few years ago.
Whoa.
You had a Paragon collection that came out, which was a very handsome volume that I only kind of had to explain to my wife why I got it. When she saw that line on the credit card, she's like, all right, I get it. Just, let's skip a couple concerts this year.
it does have a really good Salva story.
Yeah, I know there were a couple. That's what, it's like, well, there's new stories in it too. I don't have everything in there.
And they're really cool. And actually the other story was interesting because I got to play with my vision of where I wanted Kitty to go. So
yeah. Jeff,
and Sabretooth and Logan being more than we thought, as in father and son.
Right, exactly.
My continuity.
But Jeff, any final thoughts, whether it is about reading this comics in general, these characters? I want to make sure I give you the chance to say something on the way out.
Sorry.
No, not at all. I appreciate it, and that's mainly what I wanted to say. Is just thank you for breaking down the thought process and what created this book. Because, like I mentioned at the beginning, like I mentioned at the beginning, there's so many storylines that were relevant at the time, but they're still relevant now. So, hitting those themes and talking about what created those themes is really cool to hear. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, I guess for me, the fingers crossed is I would like to see a reality where the fictional side of it doesn't involve the X-Men all retreating to their own little desert island. I mean, oh, great. We'll just build our own Elba and live there happily ever after. And a world where the X canon doesn't need to exist, where we're growing out of prejudice. We're growing out of I don't think it'll happen anytime soon, But there you go. It's hope, as they say, springs eternal. And the thing, for me, the X canon's always been about hope. It's always been about, in one of the last stories, that Salve and I did in Extreme, where they've all been shot to hell and they're all dying, and Remy's dying, and Rogue just rockets up to drag him back before he crosses the gate, and Aurora looks like she's dying, and Jean's going out to get her, and it's like, no, I'm just went up to see my folks. Now I'm coming back. It's like, it's more than just, again, as I've said before, it's trying to see them as real people, or at least a novelist's vision of real people. And end as God Loves ends, with Scott looking at Charlie and saying, no, you can't give up because we refuse to give up. You established a dynamic. You established a benchmark, and we are going to live up to it, because it's important not simply to us, but to the people we know and the people we care about, who aren't just the people in this room. I think that this is our world. Humanity is our people. If we don't look out for one another, if we don't clean the floors and hang up the dishes and clean the clothes, this world's going to look like, it's not going to be a good world for us. Give 20 or 30 years in the future, which, now that I've lived that long, it's like, oh, for God's sakes, we should have had more people paying attention.
Well, I mean, Days of Future Past, the future was 2010, as I believe. So we've blown past the future,
and we're trying as hard as we can to catch up.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's all about hope, and it's all about people. And if some of that rubs off in a positive sense, I've done my job. If it doesn't, well, I'll have to keep on trying, because that's what writers do. We just keep sailing towards that whatever invisible point beyond the horizon is, and hope we can grab enough people in the process.
Well, it seems like there may have been a time limit on the internet router there, but we obviously were able to get a substantial amount of insight on God Loves, Man Kills, X-Men comic.
You're back.
Oh, he's back.
There he is. He's back. I believe that needed to be followed by a little graphic that said "Bamf," because it's like you teleported right back in.
I just figured that
you don't smell like sulfur at all.
And higher authority is dropping a hint, but
yeah, somebody pulled a lever on the Wi-Fi. Well, Chris, every time I've talked to you, it's always been so insightful. You talk about that you in your words, you say you talk too much. People who have waited in line for you to sign at cons, they might start to feel like, wow, this guy talks a lot. But then once you're the one at the front and getting to talk to you, they're like, this is the greatest thing ever. It's always worth the wait. And I know you have some appearances throughout the year. People can find those at chrisclaremont.com, including Comic-Con Revolution in Ontario, California, near here in May. And of course, I always enjoy following you on Instagram, where you're Chris Claremont. And yes. you recently did a great 4-issue Gambit series. Extreme X-Men is
No,
ongoing.
5 issues, please.
Oh, sorry. I wait a minute.
5
I must have
issues.
missed one. 5-issue Gambit series.
No, they're all 5
And,
now. They used to be 6, but they shrunk.
They got a little smaller. You know, it's interesting to a point you made earlier, is that the X-Men seem to be the characters that they're like, well, let's go revisit this time period. You know, I read just last week that Anacenti is doing a Storm series set in like the 80s continuity. And I love that iteration of Storm with the mohawk and the leather jacket. So I'm like, great. I don't even know what's going on right now. You referenced a bunch of stuff that I'm not reading. So I'm like, I don't even know, but Storm with the mohawk, I'm excited for that.
Yeah,
So
I actually like her. Where in the Gambit series, when she was de-aged to like not 10, she got whacked. She got slashed on the left side of her head, so the doctor had to shave her head, and the wound healed as a lightning bolt. And I thought, ooh, that's really cool. So with Salva in the Extreme arc, she walks in and she's shaved the left side of her head because I felt it was time for a change. Because I figure if I'm only going to do miniseries, I can screw around with everything, which I did.
Yeah.
I mean, I got a lot of pushback, but I told the editors, what the hell? I mean, you're going to fix it anyway.
Yeah. Right, exactly.
And, but it's, again, it's having fun. I mean, it's at this point, I'm locked into my own original continuity of sorts, you know, between the original 16/17-year run and then the Extreme run. But I figure, okay, that's fine. I'm not going to screw around with anybody else's continuity. I might as well play with mine.
Yeah.
Well, because there's always that moment, the issue after I'm done, where everything reboots. And that's as true now as it ever was. So I can fake anything while I'm on my turf. And, you know, if someone currently wants to swipe it, mazel tov. It's, well, you know, it's the real world. What can one do? But again, like I said, I just want to tell good stories and have a hell of a good time, and figure if I'm having fun, you guys will have fun. Which is actually, as I figured it out, what every writer tells themselves every chance they get when they start a story. So keep on doing it. As I said, keep on trying until I get it right, and then figure out a way to do it better.
Well, on that note, make sure to join us again next month for the Geekscape Book Club. We'll be around February 26th. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter at ChristianDMZ. I'll update you for what will be a very special book that we're highlighting, which is the very delicate way to say I haven't chosen it yet. Jeff Williams Jr., where can people find you on social media?
Almost at Jeff Williams Jr., but at Jeff Will Jr. on all social media platforms.
And Eric Connor, where can people find you?
At Count Eric Connor, CONNER on most platforms, not all. I'm not like Jeff, but I'm not
on the TikTok.
Jeff should be everywhere. I should only be some places.
And if you enjoy this sort of in-depth conversations, make sure to find on my YouTube channel, the Blackcast YouTube channel, Marvel Movie Talk, which is a show that we will be bringing back as soon as there's another new Marvel movie in mid-February, Ant-Man and the Wasp and Quantumania. So you'll find us over there, and you'll also find past conversations that I've had with Mr. Claremont, among others. So please find that. Thanks again to Chris, Eric, Jeff. Our friend Caitlin Cornell was unable to join us during the live portion of the show, but this is a great time to mention that she does have a fan film set in the X universe featuring Rogue and Gambit. You can find it at uncannyfilm.com to see a short love story between Rogue and Remy LeBeau. You can find it at uncannyfilm.com. Again, I'm at Christian DMZ. Thanks again, everybody, and we'll read with you again next month.